So there's a lot of back and forth between these books. Let me share just a fun little piece from the Turnpike book with you. It's the chapter called Rest Area Culture. And I went and I lived in the Joyce Kilmer for 24 hours. This is not as heroic as the guy who did Super Size Me, who lived in McDonald's 3 meals a day for a month, and towards the end of the month was dying. Had to recover. His liver had stopped working. His girlfriend had said that something else on him wasn't working. All sorts of things were working. So don't go to McDonald's too much. Apparently it's deadly poison. But okay, this is Rest Area Culture, and the beginning of it. Well, I should tell you one little thing. I stood outside when I was at the Joyce Kilmer, I lived once in a place called the Joyce Kilmer Village. Joyce Kilmer Rest Area. I stood outside there, and I would ask people as they came in, do you know who Joyce Kilmer was? And virtually no one had the slightest idea who Joyce Kilmer was. So one of the purposes of this book was to get the Turnpike Authority to start to pay attention to the very people it had named. And they've done a little bit since then, but you know, they just want to collect your tolls. It's hopeless. I give up with those guys. So I stood outside of Joyce Kilmer and I asked people, 75, 80 people, they all thought I was crazy, you know, why does this guy want to know? Why is he's probably some pervert. He's standing outside of the Joyce Kilmer wants to, and I'd ask, and one person said, yeah, wasn't she that actress who came from Bayonne? Joyce Kilmer, of course, was a man who fought in World War I, died fighting in World War I, and taught in Morristown High School, by the way. And then a young girl came along, and her mother didn't know who Joyce Kilmer was, but she began to sing, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. She began to sing the song that came out of his most famous, though not very good, poem. So 1 out of 77 people, this high school kid, which maybe says our education system's not as bad as we think it is, because she knew who he was. But this little scene is taking place in the Walt Whitman. And the little epigraph, I don't want a Jersey Turnpike rest area named after me, Calvin Trillin. And the chapter begins as so. Do you know who Walt Whitman was? I was at the Walt Whitman Rest Area on the Turnpike, milepost 30.2 on the southbound side between exits 3 and 4, and I was talking with a waitress in the Roy Rogers. Who? Chris Saniel, a 17-year-old high school senior, asked. Walt Whitman. Who's he? That's what I'm asking you. Do you know who Walt Whitman was? Never heard of him. What do you mean you never heard of him? Of course you've heard of him. You've been working here a year, and this is the Walt Whitman Rest Area. It is? I thought she was kidding, but as Chris explained, when I came to work here a year ago, they told me to answer the phone, Marriott Corporation, Highway Division 3S. How would I know this is the Walt Whitman Rest Area? And actually the people who work in those concession areas on the Turnpike, for the most part, don't come to work on the Turnpike. They live in the closest town. They come by local roads, and there's a parking area beyond the one we all know where they park, and then they come through a little gate. In fact, in several of the rest areas, I would walk out that gate sometimes just for fun into real life, because I always had this feeling, once on the Turnpike, you don't get out of here without paying your toll somehow or other, but you can walk off into the real world. There were people out there watering their grass, and there was, I met a guy out there outside the Grove of Cleveland one day, and said, what's it like living next to the Turnpike? It must be horrible. He said, oh no, my wife and I love it. I said, how come you love it? I mean, I would think the sound of the traffic, and I didn't get any farther. He said, we love the sound of the traffic. It sounds like a waterfall to us. We sleep so well. In fact, the only thing that bothers us is if there's a major accident in Turnpike and the traffic stops, we wake up in the middle of the night. And then he said, the best thing just living outside is sometimes we both work and sometimes we come home and I don't want to cook and she doesn't want to cook. We say, let's go out for dinner. And when they walk through the employee lot into the rest area and they eat in the Roy Rogers or something and they sit there, they play this game wondering who all the other people are who have come there. And I love the rest areas. I mean, they're so bad, they're good. You know, they're so terrible. Anyway, in the Joyce Kilmer, where I was for 24 hours straight, eating my meals there, sleeping at the table, and they'd keep waking me up. And I had those bathrooms, so I had all my needs. And I remember the best time to be there is about 3 in the morning, because that's when the really strange people come in there. And at one point, 2 different guys came in claiming to be Jesus, and they had to call the cops. And these 2 guys were fighting with each other, had a fist fight over who was really Jesus. It was really wonderful. But anyway, to go on with the Walt Whitman. So I thought she was kidding me about this. So then I say, Chris wasn't alone. I asked the manager of the Roy Rogers if he knew who Walt Whitman was, and he said, Walt Whitman? Never heard of the dude. So that's just give you a little flavor of the Turnpike book. The George is still the busiest bridge in the world. It's now 77 and a half years old, and a lot of as I said, celebrated its 75th. It's predicted that it will probably last another 125 years, which is pretty doggone good when you think that the Tappan Zee is about to be replaced after only about 50, and what's the one called that goes from Jersey City to Newark, the Skyway, the Pulaski Skyway. I mean, both of these things are going to come down and be replaced. And they're each about 50 years old. The George is 77 and a half now, and predicted to go another 125. So it was really built solidly, and it was built so solidly, and its towers are unique because, what you see on the cover, Othman Ahmed built the George so strongly because he hoped that indeed they would someday put a lower deck on. We know the 2 decks, but the lower deck was put on in 62. The main part of the bridge was finished in 31. And by the way, the George is built so solidly that engineers will tell you that if there was a way to configure it, and I don't think there is, it could hold up a 3rd deck. It's that strong. One of the reasons why the tower is so strong, I don't think they still manufacture the erector set anymore, but I had one as a kid, and there was a picture of the George on the cover of the box, and of a father and son working on a tower, as my father and I did when I was a kid, work on trying to, and we never did succeed in making a George Washington Bridge tower out of little girders and nuts and bolts and stuff. But it was built so strong partly, and I started to say before, there's the chapter, The Accidental Icon, in which I talk about how when it was finished and inaugurated in 31, the only unhappy person there was Othman Ahmed, because he considered the bridge unfinished. He considered it naked. It was 31, there wasn't a dime. The Depression had really set in, and it would have cost another couple of $1 million to do what the plan called for.